At 3 in the morning, the crash of boots on gravel snapped me out of sleep, and before I could even draw a breath, 4 figures in crooked badges were already storming my porch with flashlights blazing and fists pounding the door, but what they didn't know was that my dogs were awake too, and they were ready for war. The first sound that tore me out of sleep was not the wind against the shutters or the creak of old pine boards, but the heavy grind of tires on gravel outside my lake cabin in the dead of night. It was 3 in the morning, and the silence of the forest was broken by the crunch of boots. My breath caught in my throat as I lay frozen under the quilt. Then came the sharp beam of a flashlight cutting across the window. I smelled the metallic tang of cold air slipping through the cracks and mixing with the smoke of last night's dying fire. My heart thundered in my chest, and I knew this was not a hunter lost in the dark woods. This was something far more deliberate. I slid from the bed, and my bare feet met the chilled wood floor. A low growl rose from the corner, where Rex, my oldest shepherd, lifted his head. Beside him, Luna stood, rigid hackles, raised teeth flashing in the dim glow. They felt it too. Someone was trespassing. I crept to the window and peered through the thin curtain. For figures moved with purpose across the yard. Not police, not forest rangers. They wore cheap uniforms with badges sewn on crookedly. Each held a flashlight like a weapon. They were the so-called HOA security, the men and women who had been harassing me for months, claiming authority where none existed. I had bought this cabin to escape the noise of the city, a quiet retreat by the lake where the water mirrored the stars. But the neighborhood association that controlled the surrounding properties was anything but quiet. They sent letters about grass length. They fined me for leaving a canoe pulled onto shore. They warned that my dogs were a nuisance, though they rarely barked except at intruders. And when I ignored their nonsense, they escalated. Now, they had escalated beyond sanity. A sharp bang rattled the front door. A heavy boot kicked against the wood. Another slam. Then a voice shouted, "HOA enforcement, open up." My stomach turned. The arrogance in his tone was unmistakable. He believed he had the right to storm into my home at 3 in the morning. The dogs pressed to the door muscles, tense eyes burning. Rex gave a deep bark that shook the cabin walls. Luna followed her jaws, snapping in the dark. I whispered hush, but the fire in them would not be contained. The banging grew louder, would crack under the force. I clenched my fists, and every instinct screamed confront them, but I knew better. They wanted me to react. They wanted a fight that would justify whatever story they had planned to spin. I needed to think. Through the thin panel, I heard their smug laughter. One voice rose above the rest. That would be Clark, the HOA president. Arrogant, polished shoes, fake smile at board meetings, but a bully when the mask slipped. He was the one who had promised me I would regret ignoring his fines. He was the one leading this midnight raid. Rage boiled in my chest, but beneath it cold calculation formed. Clark thought he was untouchable. He thought the badge his cronies printed at a copy shop made him a cop. He thought the darkness of the hour gave him cover. What he did not know was that I had prepared. Another crash and the frame splintered. The door was seconds from giving way. Rex lunged, his teeth gnashing. Luna snapped at the crack where light streamed in. My pulse hammered my ears, but a grim smile tugged at my lips. If Clark and his crew crossed that threshold, they would meet more than barking dogs. The moment stretched in like glass ready to shatter. On the other side, Clark cursed and yelled, "Push harder." The hinges screeched. My breath slowed. My dogs quivered like drawn arrows. This was the night everything changed. The night their arrogance collided with the wrong man in the wrong cabin at the wrong hour. And I was ready. The weeks before that night had been a slow, grinding war of attrition that tested every ounce of patience I had. When I first arrived at the lake cabin, I thought the greatest challenge would be keeping the chimney swept or making sure the old generator still coughed life in winter. Instead, it was the HOA and its self-appointed King Clark who decided I was his new target. He was the kind of man who polished his shoes twice a day and measured his worth in how loudly others obeyed him. He smiled at meetings, but his eyes carried the weight of entitlement. To him, rules were not guidelines, but weapons, and he wielded them with relish. It began with letters. Thin envelopes stuffed into my mailbox, stamped in red with words like violation and penalty. The first one claimed my canoe was an unsightly obstruction on the shoreline. I laughed at the absurdity and tossed it aside, but more followed. Grass length too high. Wood pile stacked at the wrong angle. Dogs too loud, even though they rarely barked. Each letter carried a fine, and each fine doubled when I refused to pay. I tried reason at first. I walked into the office where Clark sat behind a desk lined with photos of himself, shaking hands with local officials. His grin was wide when he saw me. I explained calmly that my cabin sat on private land, and the supposed violations were baseless. He leaned back, lacing his fingers, and said, "Rules are rules." His voice dripped with mockery. I left before anger drove me to say something I would regret. Days later, a stranger appeared in my yard, snapping photos. When I confronted him, he flashed a laminated card that read HOA security. The badge was crooked, the lamination bubbled. I told him to leave. He smirked and muttered, "We have ways of dealing with stubborn types." My dogs growled at his retreating back. Clark's campaign grew bolder. One evening, as I carried firewood inside, I found a notice nailed to my door. It demanded payment of several $1,000s in accumulated fines and warned of escalating enforcement. My fists clenched as I read. I knew he had no legal authority, yet the tone dripped with threat. He wanted fear to break me. He wanted submission. But fear did not break me. It carved something sharper inside. I began documenting everything. I saved every letter, scanned every notice, recorded every encounter. My phone became a vault of evidence. Neighbors whispered about Clark's tactics. Some had paid to keep him off their backs. Others moved away. He fed on their silence. I would not feed him. The more I resisted, the more brazen he became. One afternoon, he strode across my yard without knocking and declared my dock unsafe. I told him to leave. He sneered and said, "People like you think the rules do not apply." His words sliced with disdain. I saw the hunger in his eyes. It was not about safety or aesthetics. It was about control. He needed someone to crush, to remind the neighborhood who held the power. I could have gone to police, but I knew how Clark operated. He had friends on the board of supervisors. He donated to campaigns. He wore his connections like armor. Filing complaint would only warn him I was preparing something. Instead, I stayed silent, outwardly, while my mind began to map the contours of plan. The night before the break, and I saw him again. He stood at the end of my driveway with two of his so-called security officers. Their flashlights swept across the cabin. I opened the door and stared at him without a word. He raised his chin and said, "Last warning, pay your fines, or we come in." His voice was loud enough to echo through the trees. My dogs growled from the porch. His officers laughed. I closed the door, slowly, never breaking eye contact. My hands trembled not from fear, but from anticipation. He had drawn the line himself. Inside, I sat at the table with the stack of letters spread before me. Each one a brick in the wall he had built around himself. He believed he was untouchable. He believed intimidation would make me bow. But I was no longer the quiet man seeking peace on the lake. His arrogance had awakened something colder. I looked at Rex stretched on the rug, his chest rising steadily, and at Luna watching the door, her ears twitching with every sound. They were not just pets. They were guardians. They were the embodiment of loyalty and force waiting to be unleashed. Clark saw them as nuisances. I saw them as allies. The fire crackled low and the night pressed close against the windows. I leaned back and whispered soon. For the first time in weeks, I felt calm. Not because the danger had passed, but because the path was clear. Clark had made the mistake of believing I was cornered. He would soon learn that a cornered man does not surrender. He prepares. And when they came crashing at my door at 3 a.m, my preparation was already in motion. The morning after Clark's warning, I stood on the porch staring at the lake. Mist clung to the surface like a veil, and the rising sun painted streaks of gold across the water. The serenity mocked the chaos brewing beneath it. Clark thought I was alone in this fight. He had no idea I was building a net around him thread by thread. Every photograph, every letter, every recording had become ammunition. My cabin no longer felt like a retreat. It was a fortress. I began with the neighbors. Quiet conversations on gravel roads revealed truths whispered in frustration. One family had paid thousands in fines for parking their truck too close to the curb. Another had been threatened with foreclosure over a garden shed. Each story carried the same name. Clark. They spoke of him like a storm impossible to avoid. I asked if they had ever documented their experiences. Most shook their heads. They were too afraid. I assured them that silence only fed him. One by one, they agreed to share what they remembered. My notebook filled with testimonies. Next, I turned to the county records. Buried among permits and property lines, I found discrepancies. The HOA had filed for powers it did not possess. Clark's signature appeared on documents that exceeded the authority granted by the county. I photographed every page. Piece by piece, the picture sharpened. Clark had built his empire on bluster and fraud. At night, I reviewed the evidence by lantern light. The dogs lay near the hearth, their steady breathing grounding me. Each time I felt doubt, I remembered Clark's voice booming, "Pay, or we come in." That arrogance would be his undoing. But evidence alone was not enough. I needed to show the world the truth in a way he could not bury. So I set up cameras. Small motion-activated devices tucked beneath the eaves of the cabin, another by the dock, one near the driveway. Each lens pointed outward, waiting for the moment Clark overstepped. Technology became my silent witness. I tested the angles, adjusted the feeds, until every shadow was accounted for. If he tried to break me, he would do it on record. The final piece was reach. Social media had become the stage where power unraveled. A single clip of injustice could spread faster than any lawyer's letter. I created a folder labeled Reckoning. Into it, I saved every video, every scan, every testimony. My plan was not just defense. It was exposure. When the time came, the world would see Clark for what he was. But planning was one thing. Waiting was another. Each night stretched taut with anticipation. The dogs sensed it. Rex paced more than usual. Luna lingered near the windows, ears flicking at the faintest noise. They were coiled springs like me. One evening, while adjusting a camera near the dock, I spotted Clark at the far edge of the road. His silhouette stood rigid, arms folded. Even from that distance, I felt his smirk. He lifted a phone, pointed it toward me, then walked away without a word. The message was clear. He was watching too. I did not flinch. Let him watch. Let him believe his gaze was power. He could not see the web tightening around him. A few days later, the harassment escalated. Another letter, this one declaring my property subject to inspection. The bold text screamed final notice. At the bottom, Clark's signature sprawled large and crooked. I read it under the glow of a lantern and laughed. The dogs lifted their heads at the sound. He had just delivered the rope with which he would hang himself. I typed late into the night, drafting a report that detailed every illegal act he had committed. The fines, the threats, the fabricated security force. I matched each claim with evidence. When I finished, I saved it beside the videos. Soon it would be more than a private archive. It would be a weapon released at the perfect moment. The day before the break in the air felt charged, as if the force itself anticipated the coming storm. Clark could not resist showing his hand. He marched again to the edge of my driveway, this time with more of his enforcers. Their flashlights swept across the yard. He shouted that my time was up. His voice cracked with the strain of performance. He wanted an audience, even if only the trees bore witness. I said nothing. Silence was my sharpest blade. He mistook it for fear. His men laughed. Then they left their beams slicing through the dark as they vanished. Inside, I checked the cameras once more. Each one blinked red, ready to capture. My dogs sat beside me waiting. Their eyes reflected the firelight like twin embers. I placed a hand on Rex's head and whispered, "Soon, boy." Luna pressed against my leg, her muscles taut. The night crept on. Outside, the lake mirrored the stars, unbroken and calm. But beneath that calm, the plan pulsed alive. Clark thought he would storm into my home and claim victory. Instead, he would walk into a snare built from his own arrogance. When I finally closed my eyes, I dreamed not of peace but of exposure. I dreamed of Clark's smirk melting into panic as the world saw the truth. And when dawn broke, I felt no dread, only certainty. The trap was set. All that remained was for him to step into it. The door cracked under their boots, and the night filled with the splinter of wood. Rex lunged first, his deep bark shaking the air. Luna was a shadow beside him, teeth, bared eyes blazing. Clark cursed from the porch, shouting, "Hold them back." But the so-called officers hesitated as the dogs erupted in fury. Their flashlights swung wildly, beams cutting across snarling jaws and flashing teeth. The cabin had become a battlefield, and I stood at the center calm and ready. The cameras caught everything. Each crash, each shout, each shove against the door. Clark pushed forward, yelling this property is under inspection. His voice cracked with the false authority he had wrapped himself in for years. He did not see the red light blinking above the frame. He did not know every second was being captured. The door gave way, and the first officer stumbled inside. Rex lunged, clamping down on the padded sleeve he wore. The man screamed and fell against the wall. Luna snapped at another who had stepped too close. Their bravado drained into panic as the dogs drove them back. Clark shouted, "Control those animals," but his words carried no command here. His power shriveled in the face of raw instinct and loyalty. I stepped forward, voice steady. "Leave now." They ignored me. Clark raised his fist and yelled, "Seize the property." His arrogance blinded him. He believed this was victory. He did not see the trap tightening. Blue and red lights flared across the trees. Real sirens wailed down the road. The county deputies had arrived faster than I expected. Perhaps a neighbor had called. Perhaps fate decided the moment was ripe. Clark froze his hand, still raised, his mouth hanging open. The deputies spilled into the yard, weapons drawn, voices booming. "Drop everything now." The fake officers stumbled back, shouting, "We are security. We are authorized." The deputies advanced unimpressed. Their flashlights cut through the lies. Rex released the arm he held and stood growling beside me, chest heaving. Luna circled the intruders, her eyes never leaving them. Clark tried to recover his smile. "Officer, this is a misunderstanding." His tone dripped with false charm, but the deputy held up a hand, silencing him. "We have reports of an unlawful entry." "Explain yourself." Clark sputtered, his excuses thin and desperate. The deputies demanded identification. The badges wobbled under scrutiny. Plastic and laminate, cheap imitations. I stepped into the light, holding the stack of letters, the notices, the recordings saved on my phone. My voice carried steady and sharp. "They broke into my home at 3 a.m. They have been harassing me and others for months. I have proof." One deputy took the documents, flipping through each page. Another checked the footage from my cameras. Clark's voice filled the night, recorded clear as crystal. "Pay, or we come in." His smirk caught on film, his threats undeniable. The deputies turned on him, their patience gone. "You are under arrest for trespass, harassment, and impersonating law enforcement." Clark's face drained of color. His smile crumbled into rage. He shouted, "This is not over." His men scattered only to be tackled and cuffed in the mud. The dogs barked triumphant, their voices echoing across the lake. The forest seemed to join the chorus, as if nature itself celebrated the collapse of arrogance. Clark was dragged to the patrol car, struggling against the cuffs. His polished shoes were caked in dirt, his perfect hair matted with sweat. He looked nothing like the king he pretended to be. I felt the weight lift from my chest, replaced by something sharper. Not joy exactly, but justice. Weeks of threats and sleepless nights had led to this moment. The cameras had caught every detail. By morning, the footage would blaze across social media. Neighbors would see. Officials would see. Clark's empire of intimidation would crumble under the weight of his own hubris. As the patrol cars rolled away, I stood on the porch with Rex and Luna at my side. Their bodies still trembled with adrenaline, but their eyes were calm. I knelt and whispered, "Good work." They licked my hands, their loyalty unshaken. The deputies offered to stay until dawn, but I declined. The worst was over. The forest was silent again. The lake mirrored the stars unbroken. I sat on the steps and watched the last flash of sirens vanish into the trees. When the sun rose, I uploaded the files. Within hours, the video spread like fire. Comments poured in outrage, laughter, disbelief. Memes of Clark's downfall appeared before noon. Neighbors who had cowered in silence reached out, thanking me for standing firm. His name became a warning, a punchline, a lesson. That evening, as I fed the dogs by the water, I felt the peace I had sought when I first came to the cabin. Clark was finished. His arrogance had undone him. The lake was quiet, the air cool, the world finally righted. I looked at Rex and Luna, tails wagging in the fading light, and said, "Looks like the HOA cops picked the wrong cabin." Their ears perked as if they understood. The fireflies flickered across the shore, and the night returned to silence. Justice had come not with paperwork or meetings, but with truth claw's teeth and the unblinking eye of a camera. And for the first time in months, I smiled without fear.